So thank you for being here. Of course, there is translation on Espanol, and some speakers will be speaking in Spanish. So please use your headphones. I'm Guy Berger, and I work at UNESCO. And my duties there, I am in a committee of member states called IPDC. And I see here we have our distinguished vice chairperson of IPDC, Mr. Pablo Medina Jimenez. So thank you, Your Excellency, for joining us here. This committee at IPDC at UNESCO, it's a government committee. It's 39 member states. We have the vice president here. And it is very much concerned with these issues of media viability. Has done many things. You probably saw this very good book about case studies, media viability. This morning you saw the policy brief, I think. Voila. So, one of the things that the IPDC has asked us to do as the Secretariat, these are my bosses, Mr. Jimenez is my boss, they said, make a consultation with media executives about what can you do with data. Because as you know, the name of the game today is data. The reason why the media companies lost advertising to internet companies have the data. So if, imagine a world where media companies can access that data, what can they do with it? This is what we are trying to explore at UNESCO. So we had a partnership with World Association of Newspapers to start looking at some questions about this, what to do with trying to take the issue of transparency and make it more concrete for media, because transparency is very nice. But for media, what does media really need to know? So it's more like a data ask. Now, the tech companies, they say they own this data. They will not give it. But, you know, there's public pressure on them. And maybe they might decide to open up a little bit, open up their API. They may decide to agree with certain media associations to provide some insight. They do already provide a little bit, but not much. So with the World Association of Newspapers, we put together a list of what kind of data could be useful from a viability point of view. And this is what we want our respondents to comment on. What do they think of these elements? And to tell you that we are saying, the questions are, what is the commercial data that could be useful for media companies? What would be the content-related data about the reach, the engagement, and so on? What about the policies? And then also looking at questions, which companies have data? And then what can the news organizations do with the data? Because that's the thing, you can get, if you did get access through regulation or through voluntary cooperation, what do you do with this data when, as you know, these big companies have thousands of IT personnel, they have big databases, they have software, they have artificial intelligence. What can a media industry do, a media company, even a big one like O Globo, what can you do if you get more data? So that's part of the story. But first we have to know what data would you want to ask for. So after this discussion, we will have another discussion in Paris, and then we will present a report to this IPDC committee. And I hope that they then say, keep on going and start to talk with the tech companies that they should open up in the interests of improving the ecosystem. Of course, we can't say if they'll do that. So let me ask my dear panelists to introduce themselves, because we're running a bit late, so I won't give them a full introduction. Just ask each of them to introduce themselves. And maybe we could just start with those who are online. So perhaps Tangeni Amapuda, very quickly, tell us who you are and what you do in the media.
Tangeni Ampadi. I'm the editor for the Namibian. Several years ago, I would have said I'm an editor for the Namibian newspaper, but we are now a news media company. As we know, we are all forced to broaden or work in multimedia fashion. So I'm editor of the Namibian, which is the leading news organization in the country called Namibia.
Super. And then I think we have Ms. Maru Chavez. That's you, madam? I don't know the name of our woman speaker. Please, what is your, introduce yourself.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Because I can see what you're seeing. Yo soy
yes,
Marta
I'm talking
Ramos.
to you.
Soy, okay.
I am Marta Ramos. I'm the editorial president of the Mexican Editorial Association. We join about 45 media companies, and I'm also the president of the Internet Committee of the Inter-American Press Association.
And can you please confirm your name?
Marta.
Marta Ramos.
Very good. Thank you. So, and then we have our third speaker who's on screen, the man with the glasses and a beard. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon or good morning. My name is Ilias Konteas. I am based in Brussels. Can you hear me?
We hear you fine. Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Konteas, you are Executive Director of European Newspapers and Magazine. And thank you for joining us, because I know you just are recovering from COVID. So solidarity, and we appreciate your efforts. So, okay, let's jump in then. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people with insight into this. And the first one we want to cover, the first element is, if you wanted to ask for data about, from a commercial point of view, about advertising, we have already listed some things that maybe you would need to know what advertising linked to news on the websites is making money. Okay? I hope the platforms can tell us that. If they are sharing advertised revenue with you, and some of them have got some arrangements, will they be more transparent about that? There's also a question of, in this automated, data-driven advertising, the internet companies are working with data brokers and advertising brokerages. Sometimes they own them, the big internet companies, the big platforms own these brokers. But the question is, how much is being taken in each part of the supply chain? Because when the media want to get some, because it's your content, you know, how does that compare to others that are just providing the technology service? So the advertising pie that is going mainly to the internet companies, who else is getting a bite of that pie? Mr. Liberini, please, could you tell us? I'm sorry, I didn't ask you to introduce yourself. So please introduce yourself and then tell us about advertising data that could be useful for you and your colleagues.
Sure, sir. Yo soy Marcelo Liberini.
I'm Marcelo Liberini. I am the Vice President of Digital Business in Caracol. Television is the main media company in Colombia. I think that the most important of what you have mentioned is the last one, right? The last issue is the one that offers transparency to the digital advertising business that is quite dark. I think this is quite relevant. If we could, as an industry, promote, as a media company, as a media industry, promote that all digital advertising promotion were fully transparent. And if in some countries we could make it transparent even the participation of media planning agencies. If we could put light there, that would bring us a lot of valuable information. Let's remember that the advertising market in our country is a market where many of us raise our hands, but only one of them signs. That is the advertiser. And when the advertiser sees that the flow is not very transparent, then and it's not very clear where the revenues are coming, then the funds go somewhere else. That has to do with intermediation and brokerage, but also in the metrics. There's something that we didn't mention so far, that is the transparency and auditing of the metrics. And if I needed to provide a new element, it would be the metrics.
All media has traditionally moved providing our announcers data of our audience and our circulation that are audited by a third party, but large platforms do not do that. They don't worry about that because they submit their own data, although historically and permanently they have had to correct it. Last time it was Twitter in its presentation in the stock market last week. They had to correct their data and say that it was not true, but the damage was done, that nobody audits them. They submit their own data, and they receive the percentages they do receive of an advertising pie.
Thank you. That's a very good point, I think, because nobody knows if there's fraud in the internet industry about what they claim, and nobody knows exactly how the data points by which they're selling advertising, because I understand a platform like TikTok, it collects 1,600 data points on each user. How are they combining that to sell to an advertiser? And what does the advertiser have as a guarantee? Anyway, let's move to then Mr. Ilias Konteas on the same question from Europe. What kinds of advertising-related data that's in these companies about your content could be useful for your members of European newspaper magazines?
De todos los puntos, en el documento que yo vi, lo siento, no se entiende. Si yo tuviera que hablar de los tres puntos más importantes para la publicidad, serían los vinculados al desempeño, que son relevantes para los quienes publican en los sitios web, la publicidad en las plataformas. Pero yo también diría que los sistemas son muy relevantes para nosotros porque podemos penalizar algunos artículos y sobre todo los adblock que se pone donde vemos que un artículo no se vendió. Una tercera categoría importante, si quieren, es comprender cómo se divide el pastel, como se describió antes, cómo se comparte entre el sistema y los productores. Y esto es muy importante porque tenemos negociaciones sobre esto, que también, si puedo agregar algo que no se ve y que no se considera apropiadamente, es que los datos y la información no se entiende sobre cuántos clics recibe. ¿Por qué es importante esto? Porque ayuda a los editores a identificar socios potenciales con quienes hacer acuerdos que serían beneficiosos para ambos lados, tanto quienes hacen la publicidad como los editores, porque entonces podrían tener mayor ganancia de esas asociaciones.
Turn to Yeama Thomson. from Sierra Leone. Can you introduce yourself and then tell us, in Sierra Leone, is any of your content from Sierra Leone News Agency on these Facebook, Twitter, are they making money, and would it be useful for you to know how much money they make using your content? Please introduce yourself first.
Thank you very much. As a way of introduction, I'm Yeama Thomson. I'm the current managing director of the Sierra Leone News Agency, but we have several other hats. I am the chair of the Open Data Council for Sierra Leone, which is a multi-stakeholder council. And previously, I served as commissioner for the Right to Access Information Commission, and I championed the proactive disclosure of information. We always say we need credible data for the public interest. And these tech companies also say and argue that they will release data for the public good. And so whilst they have that argument, we note in the open data space that if you're saying you're going to release data for the public good, the media is part of that public good. And media organizations such as ourselves need data so that we can survive. We are talking about a dying media industry, and we are also talking about a thriving industry in the new media space. So we need to have access to relevant data to survive. And I always argue that for Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, WeChat, and even dating sites, we need access to data on e-commerce trends. We want to know how citizens, especially citizens in our countries, transact, the locations of these transactions, the age categories, and of course the sex of these subjects. Stripped of personal data, we do not need to know the name. It can be anonymized. We also, as a news agency, would like to humanize our stories. And in humanizing our stories, we need data, and more so metadata, on citizens' opinions on governance issues, social services, justice-related issues, and more so as we are talking about gender-based violence during the COVID era. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll come back to that question of the content data that can help you editorially, because that is a key part as well. Let's just stick with the this commercial data. We've spoken about advertising data. You spoke about e-commerce data. That's something new that we did not have in our list. Let me turn to Marta Ramos. Madame Ramos, from the point of view of IAPA, what would be useful for you to know about the commercial related, advertising related data that the internet intermediaries have?
Up to now, it looks like it's a desperate relationship. What we have in principle with all these companies is a commercial relationship. We give our space, and they take advantage of it for advertising, but we do not know who is advertising through us, nor under what conditions. It would be very important for us to know how they choose the spaces, how they change their algorithms, how they change the rules of the game. We think that it's desperate that right now they are the ones who select us and decide who would advertise through us. We cannot right now know who will be announcing their products, and they are not always companies that we would have accepted, for instance, on our paper version. So we have to be clear about who is announcing through us, to be clear how they monetize our space and our contents, and to be more clear beyond the one provided by analytics and other statistical tables, to know what is our reach that makes us valuable for announcers. What we always had in a one-to-one conversation, in a relationship of partners, we have lost it with the large technological companies.
Let me turn finally to Mr. Amapudai in Namibia. Tell us, in your country, how much of your news is being accessed directly versus indirectly through the internet companies? And do you have any particular interest in data from the internet companies where your content is flowing? I think you're muted at the moment.
I apologize for that.
Good, please continue.
All right, I can really only assume what these companies really are accessing, but our website, for instance, is open. So we also have had a situation where the likes of Google can sell space on the website. When we do streaming through Facebook, they have therefore access to that. We have numbers of how many views there are at any given time, or unique visitors. So for a small country like Namibia, where the news media outlets are very few, I can only imagine that they are using our data quite a lot. And it would have been great to know, as it has already been mentioned, the basic, at least some key demographic data. Who are these people? Where are they? What kind of people are those that are accessing our content through the big companies? And how it will be great, definitely, to know about this, do I say market share? Because we don't know how much money is going to the big, especially the big tech companies. But what we do know is a lot of display advertising has dried up for us. And we see it on different websites across, when you browse across the internet, you see that these companies are advertising outside, but trying to reach the audiences here, or at least with their algorithms, try to find the audiences who are interested in Namibian content. So in essence, I can only imagine without our data, sooner or later, even the big tech companies would have no advertising clients in Namibia. So it would be really good to know which are the institutions or persons they are having there who are accessing our data, and what the market share is, so that we can work it from there.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the next element, which was touched on, the content. This is, and in fact, Mr. Amapudai, you mentioned as well, the question of views, page views, and so on. In a sense, you can get a bit of data on reach, the performance of news articles on social media. But you don't get a lot of other data about, for example, when the content was accessed, how people came to that content, whether it was because they subscribed to your online service on Facebook, or if they came there through Google, or if they were recommended on Facebook by a person or by an algorithm. You don't get data necessarily on video content versus text content. And then engagement is an issue that the percentage of people who are clicking, recommending, sharing, liking, and so on. This is another area that we thought could be of use. And then you find that there's some people who are super spreaders of disinformation on the one hand, but they are super spreaders of news. And would it be useful to know who are these super spreaders? Because maybe you can make them ambassadors for your news, that they can become celebrities and influencers, because if they're already sharing, could you get some data on that? But there's a question of anonymity of data also. There's further a question of how can you convert the traffic that is going on these intermediary platforms to become regular and direct subscribers, where you have the direct one-to-one relationship. So anything else on this question of what kinds of content elements that, of course, are key for media viability? So Mr. Liberini, please, your view on the content data.
Again, I agree with the points that you have mentioned, but I would like, if it is good, to give a different outlook, to move backwards a bit, because these days we are hearing a lot about Elon Musk buying Twitter, and Elon Musk giving some tips on things he would like to do, and one of them is that he's speaking about an open source of the algorithm. And if you go backwards, those who are perhaps older in this world, we remember what Twitter used to be like at the beginning. It was a platform that clearly separated APIs and services from Twitter feeds from its websites, twitter.com and its apps. At the beginning, Twitter didn't even have its own app. It had to buy some from the market. And nowadays, you look at the situation and you assume that the Google search results, Twitter feeds, Facebook feeds are as such. They are walled gardens where I can, at most, ask for a piece of data. And why not go beyond that if it's going to really be useful for society, as Yeama mentioned, and ask for open source, real, true open source of their algorithms, to the degree that the community itself can make its own Twitter feed version, as it was at the beginning, its own version of a Facebook feed, its own version of the search results. And instead of requesting data, media related or beyond requesting that data, we could have by country or by media or association, we could have our own Twitter feeds, our own Facebook feeds or TikTok feeds, so as to move ahead and not be always behind, but to go closer to the Web3 that would be decentralized, where control would be returned to the users, where control would be returned to the consumer. I don't know if this provides a different complementary look.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Let's ask Mr. Konteas again if he has comments on this content issue.
I would like to add maybe a few things about what you said on building relations with users that will become trusted subscribers in the end. And I think this is quite important. And you have listed in the document data on indeed those regular news consumers and their primary interests. And this is where indeed we need this kind of data to turn them into subscribers. And then I would add build on that we need, for instance, data on how many articles they read per month and per topic, which can be useful to optimize this kind of models. And then, of course, going a bit more into which articles, which kind of topics, themes collected the most views, and if there was an increase in subscriptions after the publication of some articles and topics. So I think these are things that could be considered and could be added. And then, of course, what is equally important from my point of view, and you have listed it, is the algorithms and the algorithmic changes, which can cause, as you say, major ups and downs in the traffic for the publishers. And let's keep in mind here, maybe I would make a general remark that don't all publishers, and I think it has been heard and said by several colleagues, don't have the same starting point. We have bigger ones across the world. We could even call them privileged, that have dedicated teams for this kind of exercises, the subscriptions, the testing, the analytics, the audience measurement, and they can make the investment. But then we have also the smaller ones that they don't have the resources to take advantage of the data and to extract themselves the value from their own data. So I think this is something that we also need to take into account and in consideration every time we approach one of those topics.
Thank you. Thank you. I think those are excellent points. Mr. Amapudai, please. You're muted again.
Yeah. Yes.
Bien.
It's been outlined. The issue is we would like to know our audiences, our listeners, our viewers, our readers, because at the moment it's almost like we are shooting in the dark in terms of a pattern. The pattern that we get is how many people have liked or read the story, and that doesn't go very far. But the rest has been said, really. The more data we get, specific data about where they are, how often they access our news, how they access our news, the easier for us to tailor that information to them.
Ms. Ramos, thoughts from you?
Yes, I like Marcelo's idea in terms of the fact that from our companies we can develop products and experiences for subscribers that could be attractive. However, we will always be limited because the moment that they jump from our sites to search engines or social media, then we are all the same because we don't clearly know what is the advantage that we could withdraw from these platforms to our users. This would involve a more transparent step in terms of algorithms and in terms of the broadcasting and in terms of the data that the companies manage. And those are not data that we have access to. So we need more precise information to know where we're walking on, because I feel that we are moving blindly. We don't know where we're going. We think we are doing it right. We're moving forward, and then suddenly one day there were modifications or changes in the algorithms, and that makes us move very quickly, and we need to first understand what is going on, then measure the success, see the changes that need to be done. So it's taking us too long, and we're well behind digital platforms. I think that the information that we have, the access to statistics that we have, is very limited.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered the content issues because Thomson, you did it in the your first intervention. So we can begin to, I think, approach the home stretch now. And the next question is, which companies are the key companies? And of course, this maybe will be different in some countries, but which internet companies would have data that would be most useful for you that should be approached? And just before I hand the floor, can I ask my colleague Rosa, sitting here, to take a photograph of this panel, because we'll make a story of it. So, do you want to start this time, Madame Thomson? What internet companies are the most popular in Sierra Leone, and would they be relevant? Is it gaming companies? Is it private messaging like WhatsApp, who would say they're not making money, and they say they don't have the data as well. But anyway, tell us from your point of view, which companies would be most useful to target in your country?
In the Sierra Leone context, we will say Facebook, and followed by WhatsApp. We have limited Twitter users, and Instagram. So those 4 I would recommend. And
you mentioned dating services, I think, earlier.
Yeah, I mentioned.
What is the biggest dating service in Sierra Leone?
So I did mention dating services because when you go on Facebook, for example, you find, and most of us discuss it, you find international dating services. They may not be resident in Sierra Leone.
Right.
But then, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, we know that many media before the internet were making money on some dating possibilities. Okay, Mr. Liberini.
I would add Twitch. YouTube, obviously, but I would add Twitch, and watching carefully all the Chinese platforms like TikTok and Kwai. They're growing a lot in Latin America.
Isn't Twitch more for young people playing games?
Not only playing games, but also with live streaming, in general, live streaming, entertainment, sports, e-sports, obviously, but also sports. You know, there is a very well-known streamer from Spain called Ibai Llanos, and he's a success worldwide in Spanish-speaking countries.
Great.
Sorry, I switched to English.
I'm sure that. Okay, so Mr. Konteas, platforms, which ones are key in Europe? Google?
I think you have listed them already. I am not going to disagree with the ones that have been mentioned. I mean, Facebook and Google are, of course, the first ones that come to mind. And there are developments in Europe when it comes to the relationship with these we call them the gatekeeper platforms, the ones that have the power in their hands. But then, of course, I will agree with what other colleagues here have been saying. And I would add also that audience measurement companies will also have to be considered, just to give a broader outlook. So in particular, when it comes to trends, to media trends. But that would be from my side.
Very interesting. And if I understand correctly, the European Digital Services Act that has just been agreed, it puts a lot of pressure on the companies to become more transparent. And
yes, indeed.
Would that help news producers in Europe to have? I don't know how far the transparency will go.
Well, we still have to see, because we haven't seen any final, text coming out of the negotiations right now. So I'm going to be a bit cautious, but definitely it's going in that direction. And if you combine it with the Digital Markets Act, which has also been agreed and adopted in Europe, it does put those platforms under pressure also to provide fair and non-discriminatory access conditions to their services. So basically to change the behaviors. But all this, of course, remains to be seen how it's going to be enforced in Europe.
Thank you, very interesting. Ms. Ramos, platforms in Mexico.
Definitivamente Google.
Definitely Google, because on Google falls most of the advertising on our sites, and they have the biggest measurement tools, Facebook and WhatsApp, that in our Latin American countries has been a very useful tool to broadcast tech news and fake news in general, right? I think that with WhatsApp it could even be enough.
Well, that's very interesting, because of course this information and fake news is an alternative to the real news, but also often an attack on the news and often overshadowing the news. And so if publishers understood a bit more about what the rising trends are in disinformation, it could be useful for you as a publisher. So let's, I think, Mr. Amapuda, do you have anything you want to say about platforms? Which platforms you might be most interested in?
It appears to me that Alphabet's Google, with their search engine, is probably the one with a lot of data that could be extremely useful, followed by Meta's Facebook. But then other companies I see from our cell phone networks, for instance, you have Huawei's app stores and others coming through. So those and TikTok perhaps are ones I would love to have them sharing data.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's have the last set of your responses, which is, if you could get this additional data, what could you do with it? Or do you have to have some partnerships, or do you have to hire in some services to analyze this data and exploit it so that you can make it meaningful to you? So why don't we start with our online speakers again. Ms. Ramos, what would you do if you could get all the data that you wanted, billions of terabytes? What would you do with it?
Ciertamente tendríamos que contratar.
We would need to definitely hire people that know about that. We all know, we all have audience measurement officers that measure our audience, that is, and that right now measure the free data that we have. So I think that if we had more sophisticated information, it would be very useful, but we would definitely need to have specialists, because there would be audience data and commercial data to analyze, and how to include all of this data and to monitor our subscription department as well.
And do you think IAPA as a whole could provide the services to all your members, or each member must look after themselves?
I think that it should be something that each member should carry out, should do, because at the end of the day, there are different strategies, and it will depend on the country that they're based in. And I think that IAPA could act as a guideline, as a general framework, and it would bring the big link to the big technologies so that we can link the services to, especially to small companies that are those that have information impacting their communities mainly.
Mr. Konteas earlier, and so I want to ask him if he's got any thoughts. How do you overcome the rivalry within the industry, the big ones who can take care of themselves versus the small ones? Is it possible to build that solidarity to tackle this data mountain if it comes, if it's available?
Sorry, you addressed me, I believe.
Yes, because you raised the question about how to...
exactly.
And I'm taking it further. I'm saying the divisions in the industry, how do you overcome those to deal with this problem of processing data?
I think that you have to keep in mind that there is an element of freedom of the publisher to choose how he negotiates with the big tech platforms, and then of course how they build their how to put it now, how to build their business, how to build and how to expand their business. And I think there is definitely an element here of facilitating the access to data, in particular to the smaller ones. And I'm coming back to an element that I was saying earlier, so that they are able to negotiate directly with the advertisers in the chain, but they should not be forced by legislation or even by circumstances, if let's say it's the only way for them to be able to stay in the market, to share data with their competitors unless they want to. And then, of course, I realize that this requires investment to build the analytics team, to build the teams that will do the metrics. And this, of course, means that we come back to the question of how to facilitate the interaction between the publishers, big or small, and the platforms and the big tech, which is a debate that right now is taking place in Europe, but not only in Europe, in other parts of the world as well. And I think the two elements are feeding into each other. One last remark. If we want to restore competition among big and small publishers and platforms, we have to keep also in mind the fact that those platforms, the big tech, have to be refrained from integrating data from the users across their own services, because this is the easiest way to kill other services coming from independent publishers. Mm-hmm. So maybe these are some thoughts that come to mind right now in relation to your question.
Right. Thank you. Can I ask Mr. Liberini? These companies, they have the data already. They don't share with each other, but they each, the big ones. Mm-hmm. What if they said, we'll share data, but we will also, we have a fund you can apply to have access to data scientists to analyze this for you. Would this compromise your independence, or would you accept such an offer from the big tech companies?
No, yo creo que...
No, I believe, first of all, that you've got to accept it. Ilias said it clearly, and so did Marta. There are large media companies and very small ones. Some very small companies cannot even consider having one data scientist. And even if they got funding, data scientists as a profile, as people, are nowadays an elite in the engineering world, and they will not be interested in working in a small media company. We have to consider that. So the final solution would be beyond that. Again, I believe that data is a public good, and data, personal or almost personal data, is a human right. Privacy of data is a human right. So if you've got to provide a solution, it has to be a federated one. In fact, just to solve the issue of the disappearance of cookies and digital publicity, Google proposed a solution called FLOC, which was a federation of data that they would administer. Of course, it had two problems. The first one was that it didn't comply with GDPR. But the second problem was that they decided what and how. But that line of solutions, not of personal data, but of behavioral data, could solve the problem that the digital platforms created. If nowadays we have a publicity market that is eager to get behavioral data of audiences, anonymous one, because they got the market used to that information. When it did not exist, digital publicity was at most contextual. Today, it is based on segmentation by behavior because of the enormous amount of data that platforms have captured that the media could never capture. That is the other underlying problem. A medium, large, or small media could never capture in its own site the enormous amount of data that large platforms have. So I believe that the real solution for anonymous data, of course, is to really create a data federation for all those who participate in the publicity market. But everybody means everybody, because what is the solution proposed by Google? One of them was Flock, but Flock was everybody else, but not for themselves. They kept access to all sorts of data. So there should be an independent entity respected by society that would manage data and funding. Going back to your question, I'm sorry that there was a discretion, should come from the large platforms. They would have to hire data scientists. They should be the ones providing most data and technology and all the expenses for the good of the publicity industry, of public services, and citizens.
Yeah. Well, this is a new world of big data and big challenges. We can wrap up now, I think, with this has been very rich, but I just want to ask Ms. Thomson and then also Mr. Amapuda if they have any final thoughts, particularly on this question of what would you do if you had data? I mean, what could you do with it?
Guy, I always argue that access to open data is important, but what is more critical is its uptake and use. And like the other speakers have spoken, we should recognize that there are smaller institutions, especially media organizations, which do not have the capacity to use this data. So what I will argue and recommend, and I think we should have a big tech in the room as well when we are having these discussions, is to have data responsible agreements with big tech, so that we will actually harness some of their capacities, which include access to their scientists, which includes access to their analysts, so that smaller institutions like ours in Sierra Leone, which do not have the capacity, would benefit from this. So yes, it's important that they dump the data, but it's also very critical that we're able to use that data responsibly.
Thank you. Mr. Amapuda?
I think we would probably use our pollsters and surveyors who have in the past or currently still do a lot of surveys and help interpret data for us, because just to get a dump of data alone and that we hope to make good pattern and use out of it will not be of much help.
Right. Well, I've been taking detailed notes here. We will revise our document and we will put it online for further comments. And as I said, we have another meeting planned in Paris to get other views on this question. And then we take it to our IPDC committee, and then we take it to engage with the tech industry. So this is a big thing, but we have to dream, because if we don't dream about the media catching up in the data sphere, the media will die. I mean, that's evident. So I want to thank these fantastic panelists for their insights. I think it was very rich. And thanks to the audience here in Uruguay, and it's bon appetit because it's lunchtime for you now. A round of applause for the panelists, and thank you again.
Okay.